1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for checking out my full uncut conversation with Josh Paul. He's the former U.S. State Department official who quit on October 18th over increased and expedited U.S. arms sales to Israel. We talked on October 23rd, soon after he released an enormously important letter, and when I thought he was about to be a star of TV and news. He has made some appearances, but to this date, our conversation with Paul, which we released on October 29th, remains the longest and most in-depth one on TV. Here we get into subjects we weren't even able to include in our free broadcast, namely rules of war. Are they real or figments of our imagination? The Northern Irish peace process. What did it actually take to bring an end to that conflict in Ireland? In this conversation, you'll hear more than made it to our TV or radio broadcasts or even to our free podcast. You'll get a sense of where our conversations go every week. And with any luck, you'll feel inclined to subscribe. Our subscribers keep this program free to all on TV, radio, and as a podcast, so thank you. And if you want to join that body of happy member subscribers, you can at lauraflanders.org. Now, onto my full, uncut conversation with Josh Paul. We cannot be both against occupation and for it. We cannot be both for freedom and against it. And we cannot be for a better world while contributing to one that is materially worse. So wrote today's guest in his letter of resignation from the U.S. State Department on October 18th. Josh Paul had served 11 years in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, which is the U.S. government entity most responsible for the transfer and provision of arms to partners and allies. He always knew, he wrote, that his job would be morally complex, but he made himself a promise, he said, that he would only stay as long as he felt he could do more good than harm. And this month, he reached that point. Quote, I am leaving today because I believe that in our current course with regard to the continued, indeed expanded and expedited provision of lethal arms to Israel, I have reached the end of that bargain. Josh Paul joins me now as Palestinian deaths from the Israeli bombardment of Gaza top 5,000 and just 2 of the roughly 200 or so Israelis taken hostage by Hamas October 7th have been released. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is among many who are demanding immediate Gaza ceasefire, and protests continue around the world. Josh Paul previously worked on security sector reform in both Iraq and the West Bank, with additional roles in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, U.S. Army Staff, and as a congressional staffer. He grew up between London and New York and holds master's degrees from the universities of Georgetown and St. Andrews in Scotland. Josh Paul, thank you so much. I am honored and delighted to have you with me.
No, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important issue.
Talk for just 1 minute about why you decided to go into the field that you did. When you talk about that more good than harm, what did you set out? What have you all these years set out to do?
So it has been a learning experience, I'll be very honest. I really entered the international security field in the wake of September 11th, as many Americans did, and particularly after the invasion of Iraq, where I was a young worker in DC, honestly looking for something different and a bit of excitement, and managed to get a job with the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad, and did not go into that as the ideologue I think that I am now. But it was a deep learning experience through my time working with the Iraqi security forces and seeing and understanding what American foreign policy can look like on the ground, both the good and the very ugly. And ever since that experience, I have been very focused on integrating human rights into my work, both within and outside of the US government.
Now, there are people who have asked you, and I'm going to ask you again, what was it about this point? We're looking at the last 11 years of, if we're just going to talk about Israel-Palestine, 2009, 2014, 2,200 Palestinians dead in 3 weeks. Was it something qualitatively different about this moment, or just quantitatively, or what?
Both, actually. Quantitatively, yes. I think the outbreak of violence we are seeing in Gaza between Israel and Hamas is fundamentally different than that which we've seen. It is of a scale that we have not seen previously. And to be clear, that is down to Hamas in the first instance for its initial barbaric attack on Israeli civilians. But the scale of Israel's response as such as well has also been to date quantitatively different than we have seen. It is also qualitatively different. I have been involved in a large number of deeply challenging, morally complex policy-making decisions on arms transfers. The difference is that those have always had the chance to be debated, discussed, delayed, mitigated, and even when you knew that there wasn't necessarily an outcome that you supported, there was at least the confidence that you were handing over the case to Congress, because major arms sales require notification to Congress, where there could be further debate and discussion and efforts even to prevent such sales. In this instance, there is no such debate. There is simply an urgency to rush arms into a conflict where civilians are dying en masse. And that is what I don't understand. That is what I could not do anything to stop. And the lack of space in the administration and in Congress to have this discussion is why I thought that the only place to have it would be in the public eye.
Congress can't act because Congress doesn't have a speaker.
Well, no, but I think the answer there is that that's the one thing stopping Congress from appropriating more funding to Israel. It's not stopping Congress, I don't think, from holding back any of the Biden administration support.
Inside the State Department now, there are rumors of, I think somebody described it as to the Huffington Post recently as basically a mutiny brewing. Hundreds of people apparently raising their concerns or attempting to. What avenues do exist just there? And again, what do you think was different this time?
Sure, I don't want to overstate it. I think mutiny might actually be a bit of a strong word. But I want people to understand that there are a lot of really good civil servants in the State Department who joined the government to do good and who find it very psychologically harmful and damaging to themselves when the work that they are doing is implicated in the death of so many civilians. I think there are channels available within the State Department for dissent. The most well-known of those is the dissent channel, which involves members of the Foreign Service and Civil Service can pen a letter that goes to the secretary, which the State Department is compelled to respond to under the State Department regulations. And I understand that there are such efforts ongoing, and that, to be fair, senior levels of the State Department are reading and responding to those concerns. But beyond the dissent channel, in the absence of the regular policy debate, there isn't really much space or anything else you can do.
Had you tried to raise specific concerns with specific people before you quit?
Yes, almost, I wouldn't say immediately after, but within 2 days of Hamas's atrocity, recognizing what was probably going to come down the pike and, knowing how we've seen previous conflicts like this play out in Gaza, I wrote to a number of officials within the department and said, look, let's pause and think. We've seen this movie before. We know that it only leads to more suffering for the Palestinians, and it doesn't lead to more security for the Israelis, as we have very recently and very clearly seen. So before we rush arms into this conflict, before we add fuel on this fire, are there not other things we could be doing? And let's look at our track record and wonder of how it led us to this point. I was met offline with some agreement, but online, as it were, with a stony silence and continued directives to just keep moving arms as quickly as possible.
And to back up, I mean, we are talking about, as you say, an expanded and expedited flow of arms to Israel, but the U.S., at least at the level of public budgets, we know, supports Israel in the tune of some $3+ billion. Can you give us a sense of what you think the real number might actually be, and what? I mean, I know a lot of this is classified, but what sort of support have we given to Israel over the years?
No, I mean, I think the numbers themselves are not classified for the most part, and in fact, almost entirely. And so we are talking about $3.3 billion a year in foreign military financing, which is the State Department's main method for providing military assistance, grant military assistance overseas. Incidentally, the State Department's total budget for foreign military financing typically hovers around $6 billion. So we're giving more than half of our military assistance globally to Israel.
And what kind of things are those dollars spent on?
Sure, and let me also just add that the Department of Defense has 500 million, which it provides Israel in cooperative development of missile defense programs. So Israel spends most of that money on major long-term defense articles, such as fighter jets and that sort of high-end equipment. I would note, however, that unlike almost every other country in the world, Israel is also permitted to spend, I think it's up to 20% of its foreign military financing on what we call offshore procurement, which means that it can spend it directly in Israel. The rest of foreign military financing has to be spent in the US, supporting US jobs with US companies. But Israel gets to spend some of its money domestically. And over the decades, that's actually greatly enabled the expansion of Israel's own domestic defense industry, which is now a top 10 exporter of defense arms and often competes with the US. So it's our own funding that has sort of enabled our competition in this respect.
So if the ultimate goal had been more peace, de-escalation, less military activity in the Middle East, not a good strategy.
I don't think Israel needs the volume of military assistance it is receiving from the US. It is a wealthy country, and as I say, this assistance is more than half of what we provide globally, which crowds out some other pretty critical opportunities, I would say, for US security cooperation around the world, and particularly in the Indo-Pacific.
Please take a moment to subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get information on all of our programming, including the weekly premiere on YouTube and our upcoming shows. Subscribe at lauraflanders.org. We're going to get to what things you think would be good for the U.S. to provide Israel and Palestine and around the world. But before we do, sticking with arms for a minute, you have made it very clear that there are rules. There are supposed to, anyway, be abided by. Can you talk about what rules and guidelines and regulations currently govern U.S. arms sales to Israel and other countries like it?
Sure. So the fundamental laws are the Arms Export Control Act of 1976 and the Foreign Assistance Act of 1968. And those provide the fundamental basics on how and when arms should be transferred, including a legal caveat that arms may only be provided for certain purposes, such as defense and joint operations and legitimate defense, and that they should only be used for the purpose for which they were provided. And as an aside, I think we can all agree that human rights violations and massive civilian casualties are not a reason for which US arms are ever provided. On top of the law, every administration since the Reagan administration has issued a conventional arms transfer policy. This is the policy that shapes the thinking that is supposed to, and the analysis that is supposed to go into each of these decisions on a case-by-case basis about arms transfers as they move forward. The Biden administration's conventional arms transfer policy, to its credit, raised the bar to the highest level it has ever been for arms transfers with something called the more likely than not standard. It says that an arms transfer will not be authorized if it is more likely than not that the arms in question will be used to commit human rights violations of various types. And I think it is more than apparent that arms that we are providing to Israel, particularly precision-guided munitions for the conflict in Gaza, will be used. It is more likely than not, in fact, it is a near certainty, that they will be used for human rights violations and result in massive civilian casualties.
You told PBS recently that this wasn't the first time concerns, and even you have raised concerns about units within the Israeli Defense Force. And that's important because units are covered by the Leahy Treaty, the Leahy Agreement that you've referred to, alluded to.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that? That these concerns have been raised about units inside the IDF before? For what kind of violations might you like to mention?
Sure. So what I will say on that is that because of the scope and size of the security assistance, the military assistance that Israel receives from the US, it has a fundamentally different process for Leahy vetting than every other country in the world. Every other country, if there is grant US military assistance going to a unit, that unit is vetted before it receives the assistance. In the case of Israel, we provide the assistance and then look out for reports of violations. And if there are reports of violations, those are brought up within a policy process within the State Department. There is consultation with Israel on its version of events. And then theoretically, a determination is made on whether a gross violation of human rights has occurred. To date, through this process, which is called the Israel Leahy vetting process, there has never been a determination that Israel has committed a gross violation of human rights. So I think that is obviously problematic when one looks at not necessarily even just Gaza, but the West Bank, where there are frequent reports of extrajudicial killings and of other abuses by Israeli security forces.
You mentioned a few of them in your letter. And in fact, in your letter, you make the fairly brave comparison between settler behavior and the Israeli juvenile detention system, unique in the world, and the actions of Hamas. Are you saying the settlers are terrorists?
I think certain settlers who attack civilians with the intent of using violence for political means. I mean, the use of violence for political purposes is the definition of terrorism.
So if there have been these named concerns, and if there is, universal, it seems, agreement that violations have happened, maybe not universal, there is widespread agreement that violations have happened in the past before we even get to this conflict. Yeah. Where's the stoppage? Where's the problem?
I think it is very difficult professionally to push back on Israel policy. In the days since I've left, I've heard from a large number of colleagues in the State Department, but also across the interagency and congressional staff who have said, we share your concerns, we agree with you, but you are in a position, or you made the choice to leave your job over this. We can't take that risk. We can't speak up because we are afraid of the consequences it will have on our careers.
There are rules. You made the point very clearly that the Biden administration specifically has established more, well, I don't know how you phrased it, but stronger guidelines on weapons transfers than the governments that preceded it. That being the case, how do you explain what's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to there is, just an unwillingness to criticize Israel. It's a unique case, a special case. There are many reasons for that. Some of them legitimate. But what it means at the end of the day is, I think, if you don't have a global standard, you don't have a standard. I think it's harmful in that sense.
Well, you also have Matt Miller, State Department spokesperson, saying we never violate any laws.
We comply with all applicable statutory requirements and regulatory requirements in our provision of military assistance to Israel, as we do to every other country in the world.
So I think Matt Miller might actually be technically correct in some ways. Many of these laws require the department to come to some sort of a determination before any sanctions or withholding of assistance occurs. If you never come to the determination, you've never broken the law. That said, I believe that the legal standards are rather lax and lacking, and I believe that we should be holding ourselves to a stronger standard. Part of this also comes down to questions of interpretation of law.
You also said that it is in the hands of higher-ups. Who would that be? The final determination.
I think the main policy decisions on Israel right now are being made from the top down, which again is atypical. For most arms sales, they sort of bubble their way up from the bottom. You get an application from a partner or from a US company seeking a certain military capability, and that's a debate that gradually bubbles up to the decision makers. In this instance, the decision was made, and therefore there was no space for that bubbling, for that debate.
At the top is the president. Is he ultimately responsible?
Of course, these are his authorities.
So what can be done? I'm sure there are people in our audience who, wherever they stand on culpability for this particular round of violence, want to see an end to it and want to see peace. What can they do right now perhaps to support civil servants like the ones you're hearing from who are saying, we're still deciding to be inside trying to do good? Are there things civil society outside can do to support people like that?
Yeah, there are three things I will point to. The first is a bit of a cliche, but it really does matter. Contact your member of Congress, contact your senator. I worked in a congressional office, and I know how we used to sit down with the member of Congress on a weekly basis, review the call logs and go through them and say, okay, we've had 5 calls on this side, we've had 7 calls on that side, and that really does inform how members of Congress think about their votes. So that really is an important thing to do. The second thing is, I would say, reach out to your local media. There are reporters, for what's left anyway of local media, who cover local communities and how they are reacting to world events. Make sure they're getting your side of the story. And the third thing, of course, is organize. And there are some good organizations already out there. So, for example, there's the Alliance for Peace Building, is one organization who does a lot of good work bringing communities together around both local conflict resolution and global conflict issues. So I think those are the 3 things I would recommend.
Do we have a moment now with President Biden coming out right after you resigned, actually, urging Congress to approve, I think, more than $100 billion in aid for Israel, Ukraine, and I think Taiwan? Is there a moment now, especially to stop any of that, or is it going to go no matter what?
I think it's an important moment to talk about it because it highlights it, right? And the debate inevitably will go away. In several months, this won't be something that is on the top of everyone's minds. And while it is, I think this is the opportunity to make an impression. Is it going to change anything in the short term? That I can't say. I think we have seen a slight shift over the last few days in the administration's approach. I think we've seen a change in tone, a greater focus on Palestinian civilian casualties and the harm that could be done. But in terms of the actions that underlie that, when we look at a supplemental request that has billions of dollars for arms and $100 million for humanitarian relief in Gaza, for example, I think I'm skeptical that the short term will make any difference, but I think the long term is much more promising.
You talked about the harm that could be done, and even as we speak, people are being killed. As we record this, Raji Sourani, the director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza, spoke on Democracy Now! And basically said Palestinian civilians are in the eyes of the storm. They are the targets.
They destroyed Gaza. I mean, it's unbelievable. This army targeting only civilians and civilian targets, towers, houses, hospitals, churches, mosques, schools, shelter places, ambulances, nurses, doctors, journalists. This is the most ethical army. This is the most ethical army in the world. This is the mighty Israel. Its might and power targeting civilians. They are doing war crimes, crimes against humanity, persecution for 2.4 million people for the last 18 days.
How are you thinking about any of this?
That's right. And if I may, I saw a report today about a Palestinian family from the north of Gaza who moved following the Israeli direction to do so, only for a large number of the family members to be killed in the south of Gaza when the Israelis struck there. There is no escape within Gaza. And for those of us who have experienced war, the trauma, the screech of a low-flying F-16 followed by explosions day after day after day, even if you are not physically harmed, is an irreparable trauma.
We've seen this past weekend, October 20th, Israeli aircraft dropping flyers on northern Gaza, saying that anybody who refuses to abide by what amounts to a forced evacuation or forced relocation order from the north to the south will be considered in league with the terrorists or a terrorist and subject to being killed. What's your sense of that? Is that legal?
So let me first say that Israel does have a right to respond to Hamas's brutal, violent attack, no question. The Geneva Conventions prohibit the forced relocation of civilians within an occupied area. And so I think there is a good legal question to be raised there. I am not a lawyer, but I think one can only look at what is at this point 1.3 million Palestinians within Gaza who are reported to have been dislocated from their homes. Many of those homes, of course, now destroyed and they won't be able to go back to them. To raise these sorts of questions and to ask that question, I think is very legitimate.
Yeah. Please take a moment to subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get information on all of our programming, including the weekly premiere on YouTube and our upcoming shows. Subscribe at lauraflanders.org. I mean, my hair is on fire. You don't see it, but I feel it. Partly I've been...
I would say that mine is too, but...
Yours obviously burnt up.
Right.
You lived in Ramallah. As you say, you served in Iraq. You worked in Iraq. For those of us who have seen this up close, this is a moment of despair and fury. And I wonder, holding all of the civilian victims in our hearts at the same time, I certainly feel and weep for those whose families have been torn apart by the attacks of Hamas, whose relatives are held hostage still. But with all of that in your heart right now, how do you make sense of your effort and those of your colleagues to try to insert human rights kind of rules on war? Because it almost seems inevitable that in the name of right to defense, right to reprisal, governments do whatever the heck they like.
So, I mean, there are laws of war. They are not always necessarily enforceable. And of course, the US has prevented the Palestinians from seeking restorative justice or justice of any kind through the International Criminal Court. So I think it's important to note that there are laws that apply, there are rules of conduct, and there are basic standards of human decency that apply. I think at the end of the day, as you said, what we're talking about here does not boil down and should not boil down to Israel right or wrong. What we're ultimately talking about is the right of civilians, whether they be Palestinian or Israeli, to live in peace, to feel secure in their homes, secure from rocket attacks, and secure from F-16 drop precision-guided munitions. And I hope that this administration can take a look at our own historic policies, both in Israel and drawing from our experience in the region, not all of which is positive by any means, and push Israel and push all the parties towards a solution that is more just and that provides the peace that people who just want to live their everyday lives and raise their families deserve.
Like what? What would that solution look like? What would you propose right now if you still had your job inside the State Department?
So I think there are two streams there. One is with regards to the transfer of arms to Israel right now, which is, of course, what I was most directly involved in and what I retired over or resigned over. And with regards to that, again, I would ask the Biden administration to follow its own laws, its own policies that it has set, and just to simply apply the same standard and the same space for debate to Israel as it has permitted or encouraged for conflicts and for partners elsewhere in the world. Beyond that, I think we need a radical re-envisioning of what the Middle East peace process looks like. I think it has broken down. I do not think, having served in Ramallah, that the two-state solution is viable. One need only look at the entrenched settlements and network of infrastructure supporting them to understand that there is no way for a Palestinian state as conceived in Oslo to exist in that context. So is the answer to take apart, dismantle the settlements? I don't know how politically feasible that is in Israel, particularly if we look at the coalition that's in government now. And if that's not, then what is the answer and what are we pushing for? And what is the lesson of the last few decades? I think the policy approach from the US has been security for peace, that if Israel feels secure, it will feel comfortable making the concessions necessary to allow peace. But what we have seen instead is the more secure Israel feels, the more it has pushed the envelope, the more settlements have expanded, the more civil rights have been taken away from Palestinians in the West Bank, the more the siege of Gaza has continued. And so I think we need to step away from that way of thinking and ask if maybe instead of security for peace, there's some way of peace for security.
Can you just elaborate for people that haven't followed the process as closely as you have, why the Oslo Accords of the 1990s are really so ineffective at this point?
Yes, it's a very complex question, of course. And to be fair, there is blame to go around for everyone, both those who are direct parties to the conflict and those like the United States who are third parties, but obviously intricately involved. The problem that you have is first of all, that there has been a breakdown of trust And because this breakdown of trust has lasted for, since certainly I think since the Second Intifada in 2002, we're talking about 20 years. So really an entire generation that has grown up without trust. At the same time as there has been that breakdown in trust, a lot of the ties that brought the communities together in terms of people-to-people ties, whether those be programs, whether those be labor exchanges, have also gone away. So there is simply less exposure. Part of this also, of course, relates to Israel's unilateral moves in the West Bank, which, of course, are not just the expansion of settlements and a settlement highway infrastructure that cuts off Palestinian villages from each other. It is also the security barrier, so-called, that Israel has put up that has cut off Palestinian farmers from their fields. And I would encourage your viewers to go and look at the UN OCHA, Office of Humanitarian Affairs map that shows what the West Bank looks like now. Then, of course, there is Gaza, where Israel's policy for the last 15 years has been one that is kind of horrifically known by them as mowing the grass. The sense that Hamas or Islamic Jihad or some terrorist group will rise to a certain level of threat to Israel, at which point Israel will drop enough bombs to kill enough terrorists and to make further attacks on Israel not in their interest, to reestablish peace of some sort or stability of some sort, and then do it all again in 5 years. Because, of course, the impact of this, as is the impact of the operation we are seeing now, may be to kill terrorists, but it will also raise another generation who has no confidence in the peace process and who has been raised in a situation of desperation and violence. And this is not a recipe for a lasting peace.
What are the implications globally?
I think America faces a real challenge. My own perspective is that the key strategic challenge of our times, of the coming generation, is the strategic competition between the West writ large, and the West, of course, not in a geographical sense, but in a value sense, with the People's Republic of China. There is a global competition for influence that is playing out from Latin America to the Middle East. I think the United States' edge in this competition, and certainly our most valuable tool, is our values. That is what sets us apart from authoritarian regimes around the world, including those who we are competing against. If we are seen to apply those values differently for different partners, if we are seen to be hypocritical, whether it is by standing against occupation in Ukraine but for it in Israel, or if we are seen to be pushing against civilian casualties and decrying the harm that is caused by them in some contexts, but turning a blind eye or even facilitating them in another, I think that does irreparable harm to the broader US interest, which I actually believe is the global interest, that the values that we espouse and I hope believe in are the ones that ultimately shape the future of the world.
What do you actually think is happening right now? I mean, as we're speaking, it's the 23rd of October. Israeli tanks are still massed on the border of Gaza and look like they are planning a ground invasion. Israel has talked about its right to respond to the horrific terror attacks of October 7th. Many people would say, and I'm one of them, they have responded. What's going on now, do you think? What's the end game here, in your view?
I think that's a really important question. And I think, part of the messaging that has been going on behind closed doors likely relates to that very question of saying to the Israelis, okay, you're going to go in, you're going to quote unquote destroy Hamas. I say quote unquote because I don't know that you can defeat a political movement with a military force. You can certainly defeat the military elements of it, but nothing stops those from growing back. So what are you going to do? What does the day after look? I think an Israeli reoccupation of Gaza would be a disaster both for Gaza and for Israel. I think the Palestinian Authority is in no fit state and has no capacity to take on governance of Gaza in the current circumstances. So I don't know what the answer is, and I can only hope that some better informed people than I am, and hopefully some wiser people than I am, are thinking about that very deeply, and that it is shaping what is to come.
I'm going to make a wild stab in the dark here, but I think you might be of a similar age to myself in that you have at least been aware of what happened in Northern Ireland and went from really awful
Yes.
to a bit less awful to something called
Yes.
peace, more or less now. Are there any lessons to be learned in that process, which certainly, when I was a kid, looked pretty whatever that word is, intractable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the situations are different, but similar in that they both reflect intractable conflicts that have a long history of intractability. I think the Northern Irish solution is or at least the status quo as it has been achieved, although it's not entirely settled by any means, is encouraging. What it took there was Senator George Mitchell's deep involvement, deep personal involvement with the deep support of President Clinton to drive the parties towards a resolution. I think that is what we saw in Israel, also under President Clinton, and to an extent prior to him. The groundwork was laid by George H.W. Bush. I think the problem we have is that having made that investment, and particularly after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the situation has deteriorated. There hasn't been the continued support, the continued pressure on both sides to make it work. And so I think the difference here is that both Northern Ireland and Israel were on the same track. What it shows is what happens when you take your foot off the pedal, when you stop paying attention, or when you begin to side with one side over the other. And so I don't know if there is a way back in the sense that to where Northern Ireland is.
Please take a moment to subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get information on all of our programming, including the weekly premiere on YouTube and our upcoming shows. Subscribe at lauraflanders.org. You see some people, anyway, referred to as peace activists in Israel. I've actually heard quite a few of them who have referred to their lost relatives, people being held hostage, as peace activists against more suffering in their name inside Israel.
Yeah, it's been very moving.
Clip from MSNBC of Yonatan Zeigen, whose mother was taken hostage.
We need to stop the violence now. Vengeance is not a strategy. We need to negotiate, and we need to get the captives out. That's what I'm saying. I call on everybody, on the Israeli government, on Hamas, and Canada, everybody, to put pressure on both sides to negotiate and to get the captives out. My community is wiped out. It's incomprehensible. It's just, and it was very viciously done. But that's the point. That's the point. The only way to be safe is to have peace.
Are there negotiating partners there for the kind of peace you're talking about?
I think there are negotiating partners on both sides. I think everyone, at the end of the day, even those who are, on the extremes of both sides, ultimately everyone wants peace, right? I think that to get to negotiations requires trust and it requires leadership. And I think both are lacking right now on both sides, frankly.
So I have to just go back. I think we're more or less done, and I really appreciate everything you've said. But I want to go back to this rules of war question, because I've been someone who, on many occasions in the run-up to a war, has said we comfort ourselves with the notion that we will conduct this war according to some kind of magical international code of rules that will avoid civilian casualties, not hurt the environment, make sure nobody dies, hungers, starves, or, is otherwise negatively affected, except for the active duty people who've signed up for that job. I've always thought it was bunk. And I think that we kid ourselves. So I guess as somebody who's worked to try to make those rules count, I got to ask you, how do you rate the process so far?
I mean, war is war, and the sad fact is that there will never be a war with no civilian casualties. The question is the war just? And is how it is fought just, right? And I think one can question both counts in this case, not because Hamas's attack doesn't deserve a response, but because a war premised on the experiences of the last 20 years, where it has only led to more suffering and not to peace, is continuing that, is doing that again really a just war? And then, of course, secondly, in terms of how the war is being fought, both in terms of the collective punishment of the people of Gaza. I don't understand what cutting off electricity and water, for example, does to fight Hamas. One must ask these questions, and I do not think that this is a just war. But that does not mean, if I may say, that there is no, military response that Israel should be allowed to take in response to attacks against its civilians. The question is, how?
You began by saying that you went into this work believing you could do more good than harm. During that period, we've talked exclusively really about Israel-Palestine, but we've also seen arms sales to Saudi Arabia, ongoing war and civilian casualties in Yemen, not to mention the looks pretty dismal Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion. Do you think military aid in those two circumstances is helping in the way that we're giving it?
So I am not coming from the perspective, I'm not a pacifist, and I'm not coming from the perspective that all military assistance is bad. I think military assistance can actually play, first of all, an important deterrent role by protecting allies and stopping conflicts from starting in the first place. I also think, and Ukraine is actually a good example of this, I'm actually immensely proud of the work we've done to support Ukraine, and that, the Ukrainians have fought hard, prevented the fall of Kiev, and are continuing to push back. I have no regrets about that support to Ukraine. I think other countries, and we can look at a number of examples around the world, you named one of them, Saudi Arabia, the record is not only more mixed, but pretty dismal and pretty depressing. I have, through my work in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, always pushed for us to take civilian casualties and human rights violations into account. And although it is hard to explain it without going into the internal deliberative discussions, I will say that I feel good, actually, about the difference I have made, even in those contexts, even when the decisions didn't come out the way I like them. I have confidence, and I can go to bed at night knowing that I shaped them for the better, and it would have been much worse, had I and others in the department who care about these issues not had a role. The difference here is that there was nothing that could be said that would make the slightest bit of difference.
You also at the beginning said that your views have evolved since your time in Iraq and your time living in Ramallah. Can you just talk about how, in what ways?
Sure. I mean, I think, first of all, when you are living amongst a community, which was certainly more the case in Ramallah than in Iraq, because in Iraq we were, more of a bubble, whether living in the green zone or in a forward operating base. You're interacting, you're going out every day, but it's not the same as living among the population, which I did in Ramallah very safely, very happily. So that is one aspect. You hear different perspectives, you are exposed to different cultures, and you live the life. And I think, particularly in the West Bank, when you see the life the Palestinians have, the humiliation, the constant humiliation at checkpoints, the constant, incursions by Israeli military forces, you come to understand different perspectives, and that's just a function of living overseas. I think as well, having worked for the US government, the United States has an immense amount of power around the world, and an immense amount of influence and presence, and that comes with an immense amount of responsibility, and you feel that. You are challenged working for the US government, I think, with questions and problems that you would not be working for many other governments, not because we are better or worse, but because we are more involved in so many of these complex questions. And so there is no way out of these knotty moral dilemmas. And I think you learn through that to appreciate the complexity and to understand how important the facts are, that you can't enter these sorts of challenges with a set of assumptions. You really have to dig in and understand the implications of the decisions you make, because they are far-reaching. And just to sort of put a point on that, for example, when we sell fighter jets to a country, that country is going to be operating those fighter jets for 20, 30, even 40 years. And so, what we do now will have can have lasting generational effects. It is a unique responsibility, but one that really has to be taken incredibly seriously.
Well, you are an incredibly reasonable sounding person. I'm sure it was a very difficult decision for you to decide to give up the challenge inside the State Department. You haven't wanted to put a lot of focus on yourself, but I would ask you, do you have a family? Do you have kids in college? Will there be a price you pay for having made this move?
I thought before I announced my resignation, well, I'm sure that there is a price, right? I'm already not doing a job that I really did enjoy. I am looking at the calendar and, recognizing when my health insurance is going to run out, which is one of the joys of this country. So, of course, there is a cost. But I have to say, I do believe there is less of a cost than I anticipated, because I have been overwhelmed by the response I have had directly into my inbox and my phone and my LinkedIn account where I posted my statement, from people across the US government and around the world. I feel more surrounded by friends now, perhaps, than I ever have. It means an immense amount to me.
Do you have a message for people still working in the administration and the jobs, the desks that were next to yours before you left?
Sure. I think, I think everyone does what they can based on the circumstances they live in. I would say to them that you have a unique opportunity to do good. And as I discovered, it's possible to do more good in one day within certainly the State Department and around the US government than many people can hope to achieve in a lifetime. Use that opportunity. I think you're in a place of immense responsibility, and the opportunity to speak up. You don't have to win every fight. You don't have to fight every fight. But you're in a place where you can really make a difference, and I hope you do.
This wasn't just any other fight.
Not for me.
What are you going to do next with your expertise and your principles?
That's a good question. For now, I'm going to stay focused on this issue. I'm fortunate enough, and I didn't expect it, to have a bit of a megaphone, so I'm going to continue to use it. In the longer term, I don't know. But I'll find something, I'm sure.
We often end these episodes by asking our guests what they think the story will be that the future tells of this moment. I don't know whether you're optimistic, pessimistic. I don't know where you stand, but what do you think is the story the future will tell?
I am cynical that we will see a breaking out of peace in the Middle East in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict anytime soon. I am deeply concerned about where this is leading. I fear for the future of a Palestinian presence in the 1948 or pre-1948 land. At the same time, I do think that there is a generational change in America. And I think given the influence that we have around the world, there is a very good chance the policy change will come to America on this issue. It will not come quickly. It will not come in time for this conflict. But I am hopeful that this country will pursue a more thoughtful, insightful, and just policy for the region, and a more successful one for the interests of all parties to the conflict in the generations to come. That's a long time to wait, maybe too long, but that's how I see it.
Thank you very much, Josh Paul. I appreciate you joining us. Moral courage like Josh Paul's is always going to be rare, but conversations like this one shouldn't be. If you appreciate this non-commercial, advertising-free broadcast, if you appreciate that we get content like this out every week to audiences on public television, public radio, community radio, and as a podcast, then maybe you will be a subscriber and a donor to this program. We are listener and member supported, and we take no money from military contractors and the people that bring us war. So how about it? Join our member supporters by becoming a monthly pledger at patreon.com/The LF Show, or make a one-time donation at lauraflanders.org/donate. Whichever way you join us, thank you, and spread the word. For the Laura Flanders Show, stay kind, stay curious, and thank you.